What is going on, everybody, and welcome to the collection of my hottest movie takes. And this is actually the Patreon pick of February. So if you are not aware, I do have a Patreon page. The link is in the video description of all of my videos, which is essentially my crowdfunding source. It's the place where those that really enjoy my channel, enjoy what I do, want to help contribute to what I do. And there's multiple tiers that have different little perks and bonuses for doing so. Like I have exclusive videos, I have exclusive Q&A live streams that I do every once in a while. I also give early access to videos if I finish editing early. I'll give away Blu-ray digital copy codes. There's all kinds of different things that I try to do to give back to my Patreon members. And one of the perks, one of my favorite perks actually, is the Patreon pick, where every single month I let them brainstorm some ideas for a video that they want to see me do. I pick my favorites and put them into a poll, and whatever one reigns supreme ends up getting made into a video. And this month, it is this one right here, my top 10 movie hot takes. And the funny timing with this is just over a week and a half ago at MegaCon in Orlando, Florida, me and a group of friends actually led a panel that was discussing our movie hot takes and battling it out in certain ways, one of which I'm going to be talking about in this video here. So if you like this topic, you want to see me and some other people's movie hot takes, please check out the video link up here. It was a very fun panel. It was cool to do live. Everybody seemed to get a lot of good interaction and a lot of good reactions from the crowd for some of the things that we said. So please check that out. And as far as movie hot takes, just in case you're not sure exactly what the hell that term means, a hot take is basically just an unpopular opinion. It's something that you believe in that does not necessarily get a whole lot of agreement from people, and inevitably when you say it out loud, people get fired up. And while it was completely unintentional on my part, I've kind of made a bit of a reputation for myself within the YouTube community for having quite a few hot takes and having some of the more fiery hot takes out there. And it's always fascinating to me because a lot of these opinions I've always felt were fairly reasonable, and I can back them up, or at least I'm going to try my best to back them up here today. But yeah, there's even some people that swear for as many hot takes as I have that I must just do it on purpose. I must just go against the grain to be the guy that goes against the grain. And nothing could be further from the truth. These are things that I believe, and unfortunately, sometimes it turns out that I'm on a bit of an island, and there's me and a few other people that are saying, I swear, this is how I feel. I'm sorry. Don't hate me. And with all that being said, guys, we're going to kick this thing off. And, I tried to put this in order for, the least fiery to the most fiery, judging how many times I've had people's negative reactions to me saying this, or how many times it's been brought back up after I've said it, even years after I've said it. And number one is definitively my hottest take, the one that I get the most shit for. But nonetheless, number 10 for me is going to go back to a little movie called The Terminator. And I'll be damned if I don't get some serious, fiery reactions every single time that I classify the original Terminator as a slasher movie. I'm not saying the franchise is horror. I'm not saying the franchise is slasher, because it's absolutely not. Everything from Terminator 2 onwards, definitively action. And there's plenty of action in the original Terminator, but that original movie is a low-budget horror action film that has a lot of slasher elements. And so when I watch it, to me, if you had the T-800 walking around with a machete, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because it's clearly a slasher. But for whatever reason, because he uses a gun a number of times throughout the movie, people don't like to use that term. They get a little bit too hung up on the slash part of it. And, we all have our own definitions, our own criteria, I guess, for what we consider a movie to be whenever it goes into a certain genre. There's plenty of movies out there that are cross between multiple genres. And to me, it's all based on what your experience is, what part of what genre they're going for, you latch onto the most. And as I've said, from Terminator 2 onwards, even though there's still some horror elements, there's still a lot of sci-fi elements, the action is certainly the prevalent ingredient from T2 onwards. But in that first film, for me, it's the horror. It's the horror aspect to it. This unstoppable killing machine that is just going one by one and mowing down people trying to get to its target. And it's gory. You have fists being put through people's chests. It's a lot darker than the rest of the movies in this franchise. And so while I understand if some people see that original film and they think the action is the most prevalent, if they think the sci-fi is the most prevalent, so they, in their head, kind of categorize it more in those genres. For me, the horror aspects to this have always been the strongest and the most standout aspect to that first film, because that was the aspect that kind of got watered down going forward. And when you have the T-800 as this, unstoppable killing machine that's just taking out people the entire movie. I mean, you throw a fucking hockey mask on him and give him a knife. It's Jason Voorhees. He's Michael Myers. So I think the Terminator as a slasher, I always watch it that way. To me, it belongs in that subgenre very much. Some people disagree. Some people disagree passionately. But that's my thoughts, and that's my number 10. Coming in at number 9, I am one of those people that very much prefers The Exorcist 3 to the original Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist obviously being one of the most popular, one of the most celebrated horror films of all time, if not the most celebrated horror film of all time. But for whatever reason, the experience that I had watching that movie for the first time, I did not really latch into it the way that a lot of people did, where they have those memories of just being traumatized by all the things that this little girl was doing after she was possessed. I had it hyped up for me quite a bit by a few adults saying this is the scariest movie of all time. This is one of the scariest movies of all time. And I finally watched it. I want to say I was like maybe 10, 11 years old. And it just didn't do much for me. Now, granted, I was probably too young to grasp kind of the deeper meaning of the movie and some of the themes that it was going into with Crisis of Faith. And I was just kind of going into there for the surface level, visuals and the horror that was going on with the character. But it's never been a movie that's made that strong of an impact on me. Even into my adulthood, I've seen it a number of times. And while I certainly appreciate the hell out of the movie and I certainly agree with its legacy and understand why it is so beloved, it's never been one of my favorites. However, The Exorcist 3 has been one of my favorites ever since I first saw it. For some reason, the elements of that movie have always stuck with me more. They've always been much creepier. They've always kind of seeped into my brain and stuck there a lot longer and a lot stronger than the original Exorcist. The story about this serial killer that is going through and the character of the original movie being possessed by this Gemini killer who is supposedly dead because the demons have essentially put him into the vessel of Father Karras to torment him for the events of the first film. And even just some of the visuals that you get in that movie, like that famous jump scare, in my mind, probably the best jump scare of all time with the decapitation in the hallway. There's so many things about The Exorcist 3 that just work better for me. And it all comes down to personal taste. It all comes down to what kind of affects you more, what gets you unnerved more. And I think that the fact that the exorcism subgenre has just been so oversaturated with mediocrity and garbage throughout my lifetime that even though The Exorcist is probably the best and did it first, it's kind of tainted by my distaste for the subgenre as a whole, to where even if I see a new Exorcist movie get greenlit or a new trailer, I just immediately think that, this is going to do the same shit that I've seen my entire life. There's going to be anything new. And 90% of the time, that's exactly what it is, where The Exorcist 3 is much more unique to me. It's a serial killer story. It's a bit of a detective story while also being a story of torment. And it's just a really intriguing sequel that certainly has ties to that first film, but by no means is trying to rehash what that first film did so well, which has been kind of the bane of the existence of the rest of the Exorcist franchise, namely The Exorcist Believer, and trying to recreate or trying to top or trying to put spins on what The Exorcist did so well and made such an impact with, when seemingly at this point it's an exercise in futility to try to do that. So Exorcist 3 is my preference, and people think I'm crazy for it, but I stand by it. I love that movie. Coming in at number 8 is one of the few negative hot takes that I have on here, where it's not me getting hated on for loving something, it's me getting hated on for not liking something. And it is my opinion on the original Friday the 13th from 1980, which I genuinely think is a pretty terrible movie.
Don't you say that. Don't you ever say that.
Now, I have a really weird relationship with this film because every single time that I watch it, it feels like my opinion sways quite a few points. Don't get me wrong, it kicked off a gigantic franchise. It's a very popular movie. It's an iconic film for many different reasons. But when you actually watch it, to me, it's just not very good in almost any aspect. It's not shot very well. There's not really a whole lot of creative things going on with the actual filmmaking. It's very evident when you watch it that they're just trying to basically shit something out really quick to try to capitalize on the success of Halloween. And it's a well-known story at this point that Sean S. Cunningham was literally told, like, let's rip off Halloween. That's the whole genesis of what kicked off Friday the 13th. And you have a lot of characters in this movie that are not very memorable at all to me. The final girl, Alice, is maybe the least interesting final girl of all time, certainly in the conversation for having such a classic movie. The kills are great. Tom Savini's kills effects are awesome. That's kind of the standout for me. There is some in the back half of the movie, there's some entertainment to be had once things start to kick off and people are dying one by one, and that kind of gets you into that old school camp slasher. And there's some nostalgia to be had there for sure. But even the overall point of the movie, which is a whodunit, which is the first film's basically the only film that really goes for that angle, where somebody's killing all these camp counselors and we don't know who, and we're trying to figure out who it is. And the only hint that we have is this legend about this kid that drowned named Jason. And then Pamela Voorhees shows up in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the movie out of absolutely nowhere, has not been introduced, has not been hinted at, has not been talked about. And that completely breaks how you do a whodunit, because for us to be able to participate in the investigation and figuring out who done it as audience members, we have to have enough information to be able to come up with some kind of hypothesis, whether it's well told, whether it's hidden, whether there's a nice twist at the end or not. We have to have breadcrumbs there to where somebody might be able to figure it out. Well, you can't figure it out if you don't know the fucking character exists until they show up and reveal themselves as the killer. So as much as even the final act of this movie with Betsy Palmer is pretty iconic and celebrated, it hurts my brain when you get to it and you're like, that's breaking all the rules. Like, you don't even know how to do a whodunit right. There are multiple scenes in the movie that add to nothing, that go nowhere. They're just there to stretch out the movie to a feature length because they had no story, they had no plot. You got the famous, or the infamous scene where they kill the snake, where animal activists got all up in arms about it, and nothing goes on in that scene. Just a snake shows up, and they freak out, and they chop the snake in half, and then they move on with their lives. You've got, there's a scene on a dock, I believe it was Kevin Bacon and the other girl that are just there standing on a dock for like a full minute with nothing happening. You get to the third act of the film where things are supposed to be ramped up, and the intensity and the pacing is supposed to be ramped up. And it shows in real time. It shows Alice making coffee, where she walks to a cupboard and gets something and goes and finds a cup. And then she puts on the water, and then she turns the oven on and stands there. It's like a full 2 minutes of nothing, because they had nothing to fill this movie out with and just needed an excuse to put a movie out to capitalize on something else. So nonetheless, you can't deny the legacy of the movie. You can't deny that a lot of people have nostalgia for it. You can't deny that it is a success in creating one of the biggest horror franchises of all time. But I stand on the hill, and I will die on the hill, that most people that love Friday the 13th movies don't care much for that original film. They just like it because it's part of one of their beloved franchises. I've never met a single Friday the 13th fan that has the original film from 1980 in their top 3, maybe even in their top 5. It's not a good movie. Number 7 is one that it used to be a lot spicier when I first started talking about this franchise, but over time it's lost a bit of its edge because a lot more people are coming around on this movie as time goes on. And it's my opinion that Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, is the second best movie in the Halloween franchise. I love the original film. Nothing's ever going to touch the original film, although I do find it to be slightly overrated sometimes with the amount of just ungodly amounts of praise that people throw on it. But Halloween 3, Season of the Witch is a movie that for the longest time I never bothered with, because the mass popular opinion out there was that it was garbage. It made no sense in the franchise. It's stupid. It was like one of the biggest failures of all time. And so I didn't watch this movie until I was like 25 years old. And as soon as that movie was over, I was kicking myself in the ass, constantly going, why did you listen to everybody else? Because this movie's awesome. And if I would have watched this as a kid, I'm here to tell you, there's a slight chance that this might have ended up being my favorite of the franchise. Probably not. Probably not. But I don't know. It could have been, because I could have seen this being a movie where one of those classic VHS tapes that I would just rewind and watch over and over again, because I love Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I like how unique it is. I think that it's shot beautifully. I love the score here. To me, it's the most unique and has the most style and the most standout of any movie after the original Halloween. Because as much as I like a lot of the Halloween sequels, and I do, that's always been a film and a concept that, to me, never made a ton of sense to become a franchise. It was just because of the success of it that they made it into one. You know, it's a very finite concept that, to me, is most effective in that first film because of the whole point of Michael Myers being supernatural, and he disappears at the end, and you have all those shots of the house. You never know where he's at. He just kind of disappears into the wind. He's a part of nature almost, and you lose that whenever he comes back in any of the iterations and any of the different timelines that we have. So the fact that Halloween 3 came out and John Carpenter and company were trying to do something different and try to harness the Halloween holiday and do more of a anthology approach to just telling really unique stories based around the holiday, in a way, I almost wish that it would have taken off more, because I would have been fascinated to see what this franchise would have turned out to be if that anthology idea would have kicked off, and see what crazy stories we could have gotten aside from 10 or 11 more Michael Myers chases his sister movies. So as much as I really enjoy this franchise overall, there's only a couple of them that I really dislike. Halloween 3 to me has always been one of the more rewarding experiences. It's one of the ones that absolutely is an October staple for me. I think it's just a wacky, wild, crazy, campy, and very dark and fucked up concept, trying to murder all the children in the world with this commercial, and the masks are iconic, and Tom Atkins is just a badass, where it's just a doctor that's an absolute pussy hound goes to try to save the world, and it works. It just works because of Tom Atkins. So I've always enjoyed this movie. I'm really glad that it's starting to catch on a bit more with people, and it's starting to get more of a following, and people are starting to let go of their grievance that it didn't have Michael Myers in it and see the movie for what it actually is. Still some people that don't like it, and that's totally fair. It's wacky and weird, so it's not going to be for everybody, but for me, it absolutely it hits all the taste that I want in a wild Halloween horror film, and it is my second favorite of this franchise. Number 6 is the one that I'm probably going to have to go out and walk the plank for the most, because there's no evidence yet that I know what I'm talking about, and I don't even know when it's going to happen, if it does happen, to give me a little bit of backup. But this is one that doesn't have to do with a specific film or a ranking in the franchise or anything else that most of the rest of this list comprises, but it is my opinion that we can have another Freddy Krueger that is not played by Mr. Robert Englund. Now, don't get me wrong. Robert Englund is God in this household.
This is God.
Freddy Krueger and Chucky are my two favorites. When I say that, it is no slight whatsoever on the genius of Robert Englund, what he did to that role, and how iconic he is and synonymous he is with that role. I get it. However, I am of the opinion that for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise to continue, we need to have a new Freddy. I am not somebody who wants to have the Halloween 2018 treatment done to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I do not want to see a legacy sequel that deletes everything after the first film, and you get Heather Langenkamp back, and you get Robert Englund back for one more. I just don't want that. I think the idea is easy. I think it's boring. I think it's uninteresting. And as much as I love Robert Englund, like he has been on record for decades at this point saying, I'm done with Freddy. I don't want to do Freddy anymore. Give it to somebody else. Let somebody else be the character and make it their own. I have no interest in this. And you can make the argument that they can dump a truckload of money on his lawn and he'll get his ass back in that glove and that green and red sweater pretty fucking quick. And I do think that that is definitely a possibility. But I do think that the best course of action to rejuvenate this franchise is to make a new film with a new Freddy and start a new timeline of movies that aren't tied to the originals, and go in a new direction with it without feeling like you have to pay respect to a legacy of one or two movies or follow the rules of the timeline of those or get specific cast back to make sense canonically with those movies. I think that's way too many handcuffs to put on this franchise. You know, it's easy to do with Michael Myers or Jason because it's a fucking dude in a mask. You can put anybody in there and hopefully they give a great performance, but it doesn't really put a whole lot of difficulty on you to recast those two characters. Freddy and Chucky, my two favorites, extremely difficult to do because the actors who portray them are synonymous with them. But I would argue that if you even go back to the most recent Nightmare on Elm Street remake, which I don't think is a very good movie at all, I think Jackie Earle Haley actually did a really good job with what they gave him. Now, they fucked him over with some really bad makeup and with a bad script and with a lot of what felt like studio decisions to directly redo scenes from the original film in 1984, and it just none of it worked because it all looked better in 1984. They made the horrible mistake of losing focus on the child murderer aspect of Freddy Krueger and focus completely on the other side of Freddy Krueger, which has only ever been mildly suggested and just like hinted at, or, you know, something that was like, we acknowledge that we kind of feel like that was part of his character, but it was never overtly stated. And then in the remake, they overtly state it and run with that. And it didn't work. It doesn't work whatsoever when you focus on that. So there's so many things about that movie that let him down, but his performance, his laugh, his voice, his maniacal, dark, sick, twisted sense of humor that very much kind of bridged the Nightmare on Elm Street 1 Freddy with Dream Warriors Freddy, I thought was very good. So I genuinely believe if they had a great script for a Nightmare on Elm Street film and they went out and they found an actor that I would say to go with a either unknown or mostly unknown actor and let them actually become Freddy, I genuinely think if the performance is great and the script is great, a lot of us fans that think nobody but Robert Englund can play this character will immediately say, oh, wow, this is cool. This is different. This is, I like this. Somebody else can take this character in a new direction. Now, again, I'm talking out of my ass until it actually happens. And many people that hate the remake are going to use that as evidence of, well, see, it sucks because of him. It doesn't suck because of him. Actually, I think that Jackie Earle Haley is the one thing in that movie that really is holding it up from being a complete dumpster fire. But yeah, you get somebody like a unique an interesting actor that is mostly unknown that can disappear into the role the way that Robert Englund did in 1984. Not a gigantic A-list name that we're just going to see that actor in makeup. You give them the keys to take Freddy in their own direction, and you give them a great script that's directed well. And I think we could genuinely have a new era of Nightmare on Elm Street films with a fantastic Freddy. A lot of stars have to align to make that happen, but I do think that it's possible. And for me, I think it's the best direction to go. Because even if you do get Robert Englund back and Heather Langenkamp back for one movie, it's just going to be one movie. It's just going to be one movie, and then you got to reboot it again anyway. So I just don't see the point in going that direction. So huge Nightmare on Elm Street fan here. I know that a lot of people don't agree with that, but I genuinely think that that's the best direction to go. And if I was the one writing the checks, that's the direction that I would go. Moving on to number 5 brings us over to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. And for my money, the best movie in that franchise is the 2003 remake. Now, I get it. If you were around when the original Texas Chainsaw came out and it made a distinct impact on you, and it was just this riveting experience that you had whenever you were younger, or seen it in the theater for the first time, and it's just stuck with you, and no movie will ever touch that in this franchise, I totally understand that. I respect that. And that's exactly why I love the remake so much, because that's the experience that I had with that film. That was my first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I had never seen any of the previous films, never saw the original. And when I went to go see this in theaters, I really hadn't had much experience in even the subgenre that this movie lingers in, which is like cannibalism and massacring people, hence the name. And I've always grown up on slashers that are a little bit more campy and had a little bit more fun with the concept. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003 was, and still is in a lot of ways, the scariest movie theater experience that I had ever had. I mean, it was me, my dad, maybe two other people in like a Sunday afternoon, pitch black theater, and that movie plays, and I was on edge from start to finish. I was disturbed. I was tense. I was anxious. And there's just very few horror films that have ever given me an experience like that. And the ones that do, I always value so much because they have been such a unique experience. Is it a much more glossier and a much more studio version of Texas Chainsaw? Absolutely. And I understand those that grew up with the original movies kind of not loving the direction that movie took and feeling like it shaved off a lot of the disturbing edges and was just a bit too clean for what they want from a TCM movie. I get all of that. It's all a matter of perspective. That's what makes everything so fun to discuss, is where people come from, what their experience was, which ones they saw first, which ones they grew up with. And this one has always been one of my favorite horror films because it just genuinely freaked me the fuck out. To where we walked out of the theater, me and my dad were like, we would never buy that. We would never rewatch that movie. And then we immediately bought it and rewatched it when it came out. But it shook us to where we're like, I don't know if I want to experience that again. I thought that Andrew's version of Leatherface is the scariest version of Leatherface for me. I mean, he's got the disturbing kind of off-kilter nature of Leatherface while also having this very physically imposing aspect to him. You have the Arlie Ermey character of Sheriff Hoyt that to me is the scariest character in this franchise. Just a guy who's not physically imposing, but psychological warfare with legs. And I think that the gore in the movie is not overdone. Like, it's not gratuitous, but it's definitely effective. I like all the characters, so I'm invested in them surviving, and pretty much none of them do. So it's a movie that I genuinely love. I value. It's always been one of my favorites. And as much as I have grown to actually genuinely like the original Texas Chainsaw, for a long time I didn't care for that movie. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. It was something that was a very grating experience by design, but because of that, it was never a movie that I like to rewatch or really held in very high regard. And the more that I watch it, the more that I appreciate it, the more that I respect it, the more that I genuinely start to enjoy that specific experience that original film delivers when I'm in the mood for it. So I've come around on it a lot more than I used to, but it's still, it pales in comparison to the experience that I had with the remake in the theaters. So that's my experience with it. It's always been my favorite. It's probably always going to be my favorite. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is not one that's certainly on an upswing, so I don't expect them to have like this fucking banger that comes out in the next couple of years that replaces that on the throne of best TCM for me, but it just, I love it. It's one of my most valued movie theater experiences. Coming in at number 4 brings us back to the Terminator franchise, and to me, it's odd how hot of a take this is.
What the fuck did I do wrong?
I genuinely think that Terminator Dark Fate is, without a doubt, the best sequel after Terminator 2. You have multiple attempts to follow up Terminator 2, which, for the record, is my second favorite movie of all time next to Die Hard. I mean, they might as well be tied for first. Terminator 2 is a perfect movie to me, and it's a movie that I grew up with, and I have just nothing but gargantuan amounts of love for. And I love the first movie as well. It's not quite on the level of T2 for me, but it's damn close. Those first two movies are like untouchable pieces of cinema. But in my lifetime, there have been multiple attempts to try to follow up those storylines. You had Terminator 3, which I liked okay when I first saw it, and I certainly don't hate it. I don't have the level of disdain for it like my buddy Brian Lomax does, but it is a gigantic, gigantic step down from the first two films. Then you have Terminator Salvation, which tries to go to the future war. And so it's kind of a sequel and a prequel in the same way because of the loop of time there. And a lot of people just did not appreciate what they tried to do with this. And to me, I actually really enjoyed that movie. I wish the marketing didn't give away the big plot twist regarding Sam Worthington's character, but nonetheless, I genuinely enjoy that movie. I do think it's a great Terminator film. I wish it would have been a little bit more into the rated R angle that the first two films were, but I really do like that one. Then you have Terminator Genisys, which oddly enough, people have kind of come around to liking for some reason. But when it came out, it was just the blunt end of a bunch of ridicule. Like, oh my God, this is how far the Terminator franchise has fallen, that this they actually thought was a good idea. Once again, trying to bring Arnold Schwarzenegger back, trying to do something different. They tried to redo the events of the first film and make it to where the Terminator's been training Sarah Connor and she doesn't need to be saved. And they recast Kyle Reese, obviously. There was interesting ideas there. And I can have fun with that movie for the interesting ideas, but it was a jumbled mess. And yet again, the marketing gives away the big plot twist regarding John Connor becoming a Terminator. And so now you have three wildly different attempts to follow up those first two Terminator films in following the legacy, the legend of the John Connor character. And while I have appreciation for all three of them in different aspects, some much more than others, you can pretty much say across the board all three were failed attempts because none of them are held in very high regard, certainly nowhere close to the first two films. And then you fast forward to a number of years ago when Terminator Dark Fate was coming out. And yet again, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger back into the fold. And for the first time since Terminator 2, we're going to bring Linda Hamilton back as Sarah Connor. And I didn't know a whole lot about the story of this. I just knew Sarah Connor's back. We're going to try this again. The trailers seemed to be along the lines of the first two films much more. And so I was excited for it. Went to go check this out, and I loved Terminator Dark Fate, and then was immediately shocked to see over that weekend how much hate and disdain the movie got. And a lot of it was from leaks. People leaking plots and leaking things that they were going to be doing with the character of John Connor. And so I think most people that hated that film that weekend and have continued to hate it probably still haven't even seen the fucking thing, or they saw it, but they decided to hate it before they even watched it and just never gave it a chance. But the main subject of ridicule for Terminator Dark Fate is that in the opening reels of the movie, they kill off John Connor. It's a direct sequel to Terminator 2. You have a CGI recreation of Edward Furlong, John Connor, and Terminator 2, Linda Hamilton. And there is another Terminator that was sent back that finally catches up with John Connor in like Mexico after they have already wiped out Skynet, and he fulfills his mission of killing John Connor. And that's the inciting incident that sets off Terminator Dark Fate. And that is the main point that people argue against it, saying this movie is garbage because you have destroyed the legacy of John Connor. You have destroyed the victory of Terminator 2. You have ruined the ending of Terminator 2. And it gets a lot of somewhat understandable comparisons to Alien 3, which is a sequel, and ironically enough, a sequel to a James Cameron, like, big blockbuster beloved film that is infamous for opening up and killing some of the lead characters, beloved characters from the previous film, and fundamentally undoing the victory and the ending of that previous film. So to kind of go point by point with why I loved Terminator Dark Fate, to me, tonally, it fit the first two movies the most. It has the action, but it also maintains the darkness of the horror and the sci-fi aspect. I think that the Rev 9 was the most interesting and the best villain that we have had in this franchise since the T-1000. The fact that over and over they kept trying to think of a way to outdo the T-1000. And as a concept, you cannot do that. There's nothing that you can do that is a more advanced killer than the T-1000. And so they realized that and just came up with a concept where you have the first Terminator and the second Terminator's villains essentially in one, where he has the endoskeleton that's very similar to the T-800, but also has the liquid metal that can kind of be like this doppelganger. And so to me, that was a brilliant concept. It's like, stop trying to reinvent the wheel and just give us two wheels. Cool, perfect, that works. I really like the cast here. I think that Linda Hamilton specifically was great, and her performance was a nice little advancement from Terminator 2. And I even liked what they did with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, it's easy to make fun of like the Carl thing because he's kind of posing as a human and he hangs wallpaper or something like that. Like, okay, on paper, it sounds stupid. In execution, I thought it made sense. Having this machine that has fulfilled its programming, its one purpose, and now ceases to have an existence and has this crisis of existence where you just, what do I do? I can't self-terminate. That's a rule that's established from the second film, but I have no point of existing anymore. And so establishing what that machine would do to kind of learn humanity and imitate humanity and becomes like this protector for this family, like a father figure for this family. And by the end of the film, doing what he can to like redeem himself for killing John. Like, I thought that was all really interesting stuff. But most of all, with the killing of John Connor, my argument is this. With Terminator 3, Terminator Salvation, and Terminator Genesis, we have tried every which way to continue the story of John Connor, and it just never really pans out all that well for the masses. Like I said, I like Terminator Salvation quite a bit, but it doesn't pan out very well for the masses. That character's arc, that character's purpose, to me, comes to a natural conclusion at the end of Terminator 2. We are told about this legacy, this great warrior, this leader in the first film. In the second film, we're told about it yet again, and we get to see the beginnings of it in Edward Furlong's performance, and through him pairing with this T-800 and kind of teaching humanity to this machine, and in a way redeeming his mother and bringing the humanity back to her through his leadership. He achieves his ultimate destiny by the end of that film, which is stopping Skynet. In this version of events, it was as a kid by bringing together all of these people and stopping Skynet before it was started, versus the legacy that we're told about throughout the first two films, which is getting to the future war, and he leads the resistance against the machines and eventually overthrows them after the world has been decimated. But he fulfills his same destiny. So his character arc that we've been told about for two films is complete now. So you start Terminator Dark Fate, and it's always been a question of mine of why Skynet didn't send back multiple Terminators. Like, obviously you wouldn't have a movie if they sent back an army, but why they didn't do that was always a question to me. So when the third film, when Dark Fate comes around, and the third film in that trilogy nonetheless comes around, and they have this plot point of Skynet did send multiple Terminators, in different points in time, and this is just one that got to him first. They killed John Connor, and people tend to say, well, that undoes the victory, that undoes the ending of Terminator 2, just like with Alien 3 that you say you hate. And I don't think it's the same thing whatsoever. I understand the comparison just like on surface level. I understand that knee-jerk reaction to compare the two. But for me, the difference is the ending, the victory, the ultimate fulfilling of the destiny of John Connor is still intact with him being killed. He still stopped Skynet. He still redeemed his mother. He still saved humanity from that apocalypse. And now you have many, many years in the future, this other impending apocalypse from a different company and a different piece of technology. And some people would say, well, that's just the same thing over and over again. Like, it doesn't even really, it's redundant. And I would say that that's realistic. If you have Microsoft go down, you're going to have Apple right behind them picking up the slack. And so if you have Skynet that goes down, you have this other company that's eventually going to go for the same exact technological advances and put us down the same exact dark path. And fiction very much imitates life, and history repeats itself. There's never been just one war. There's always more wars. There's always more conflicts. There's always humanity learning the same lessons over and over and over again when we should have learned it, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And that's just the way that it is. So again, to me, that makes sense, that there's another threat, another impending apocalypse based on technology, and there's a person, there is a savior, there is a messiah, if you will, that this technology, that this company is going to be targeting, very much like the way that they did with John Connor. Now, the character that we get here, I believe her name was Danny, not anywhere near as interesting as John Connor, so I understand the criticisms with her and the way that they tried to pull the plot twist that it was her son, the baby, and not actually her. Like, didn't completely work. Like, to me, it was obvious, but it didn't, derail the movie in any way. But what I like so much about the direction that they decided to take with killing off John Connor and effectively ending his story arc and moving on to another apocalypse with another savior is that it reframes, the position of the character of Sarah Connor, who to me has always been more of the interesting character of those first two films. As much as I love what Eddie Furlong did, those first two films to me are Sarah Connor stories. And the fact I've already talked about that I think the first Terminator is a slasher film. If I'm going by those rules, like Sarah Connor to me is my favorite, quote unquote, final girl. She's my favorite. She's a badass. I love her character arc. I love the way that the first movie makes her rise to this occasion, and the second film explores her descent into madness over this and obsession and having to reclaim her humanity through her relationship with her son. And you get to this third chapter of this story now where she has lost her son, and she's this broken person that now has effectively turned into a Terminator herself, to where her only purpose for existing is to kill every single machine that is dropped out of the sky. And that is what she is here to do. And then eventually, through meeting Danny and meeting Carl, and yet again having to accept the notes of humanity in a machine, has now been reframed to actually be the savior, to be the messiah above all else that everybody said her son was. And to me, that was just such a profound way to continue this franchise in a direction that is keeping with the overall theme of Terminator and sticking to what we love about it, while also going in a different direction that is just not a fourth attempt to continue the legacy of John Connor when that legacy had already reached its natural conclusion. So now you get to Dark Fate, and now Sarah Connor is the one that is going to train Danny, that is going to be the next savior of humanity, the next leader of the resistance. And so now, for two separate apocalypses with two different threats and two different students, if you will, she has now led the resistance to overthrow the machines and overthrow the apocalypse. So you look at the story arc from Terminator 1 to Terminator 2 to Terminator Dark Fate, and the story arc of Sarah Connor across those three stories is that she is the one that matters. She is the one that figuratively and literally births the savior of humanity and is the one most directly responsible for humanity's victory. So to me, that works perfectly. I've never understood all of the hate that this movie gets for that one decision that is made in the first 5 minutes of the film. I really do hope that over time, people will start to come around to this the way that they have things like Halloween 3. Some people legitimately just don't like it. You have the first two films and nothing else exists after that. Totally respect that. I get it. Even though I love Terminator Dark Fate, it's nowhere near the first two films. I would still say that. But I love what it does. To me, it's easily the best follow-up to those first two films, and I'm sticking to it. All right, now we are getting into the top three, the spiciest of spicy takes, and coming in at number 3 for me is going to go to my beloved Child's Play franchise. And ever since I dropped my top 50 horror films video like 3, maybe even 4 years ago now, time flies on YouTube, I have been continuously reminded how batshit crazy I am for putting Child's Play 3 above the original Child's Play.
What are you, fucking nuts?
Now, there's many layers to this, to this hot take that has always been something I've had to endure and baffle myself over. First of all, is just the fact that Child's Play 3 in and of itself is an installment in this franchise that seemingly most people do not like. And I've never understood that. Like Child's Play 3 was my first horror film, so I have a lot of deep-seated love and nostalgia for it for that reason, which some people do not have, and that's totally fair. But to me, I've never really understood the main criticisms that are hailed at this film. To me, Child's Play 3 does basically everything that Child's Play 2 does that is celebrated and loved, but Child's Play 2 just got there first. And one of the main criticisms that's always hailed at Child's Play 3 is like, at this point, it was just ridiculous. It's the same thing over again. It's Chucky trying to get into the body of this kid. And my argument is always, we're 3 movies in, and you're bitching about it with Chucky. How many Friday the 13th films is the same fucking thing over and over again? How many Halloween films is Michael chasing his sister or his niece the same fucking thing over and over and over again? But yet Chucky was supposed to reinvent the wheel 3 movies in. I've never agreed or appreciated that criticism. You have some people that don't like the recasting of Alex Vincent. We got Justin Whalen here. They wanted an older Andy so that he could be kind of the protector and another young kid be the target of Chucky. I understand that criticism. I like Justin Whalen and what he does. Obviously, I prefer Alex Vincent, but that's not a big issue for me in the third film. Tyler, the young kid who is now the target, a lot of people don't like him. Fair enough. He's not nearly as good as Alex Vincent was in the role of Andy. He's not a character you endear yourself to as much. But again, he's a smaller part of the movie. Andy is still the focus. But Chucky is awesome in Child's Play 3. His attitude, the animations with the doll, the one-liners by far are the best in Child's Play 3. There's great kills. There's great comedic moments. I really like the changing up of the setting and putting him in this military boot camp school. I like the third act with the theme park, the fair. If the whole movie had the energy of the third act, I think most people would say this is the best Child's Play film. I really do love this movie. It does have its flaws, sure. All of these movies do. There's very few slasher films that don't have inherent flaws, but I genuinely love Child's Play 3. And I genuinely love the original. Me putting 3 over the original is not a slight on the original. The original is great. I love Tom Holland, what he does as a director. I think he's one of the biggest unsung heroes in horror history. You have the origins of everything that I love in this franchise. You got Brad Dourif in both the live action role as well as the voice acting role of the doll. You got Chris Sarandon in here, who I love. There's so many things about the original. It's an absolute classic to me. But for what I want out of a Chucky film, I tend to gravitate more towards the sequels because by then Chucky is fully realized. He's unleashed. They knew by Child's Play 2 onward what the strengths of this franchise was going to be, and that's just letting Chucky be a sick, twisted, maniacal bastard. In the first film, a lot of it's in POV, a lot of it is even somewhat of a mystery of, is it the doll or is something else going on? Is Andy the killer? Like, there's questions about that if you watch the first film and go in blind. And Chucky's not really a full force on screen until at least the last half, maybe even the third act exclusively. And so while that movie is great, it's awesome, it's a classic, it's one of my favorites, Child's Play 2 and Child's Play 3 I've always preferred rewatching more, and I've always had more fun with because they're the Chucky show. So that's really why my ranking ends up being the way that it is. Child's Play 3 is so important to me, so it's always going to get bonus points for that, but I genuinely enjoy that movie on a level that I rewatch it probably 5 times more often than I do the original film. Coming in at number 2 is the fact that Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, is my least favorite Evil Dead film. Now, pay attention to the fact that I did not say is a bad film, or that I dislike the film, or that I hate the film, or that it's terrible, or it sucks. No, it's just my least favorite of the Evil Dead films. I think that Evil Dead, as well as Scream, are the 2 most consistently good quality horror franchises out there. To me, when you walk into an Evil Dead film, just like when you walk into a Scream film, you kind of know what you're going to get, and all of them have been good to great to fantastic. Now, where the contention comes in with this is that Evil Dead 2, more often than not, is people's favorite of this franchise, and Evil Dead 2 is the one that's certainly the one that's most celebrated and beloved of this franchise. But for me, when I go to an Evil Dead film, and all of them have some sort of a mix between horror and comedy, I prefer my Evil Dead films to lean much heavier on one side or the other. You have the original Evil Dead, you have the Evil Dead remake or, reboot, whatever you want to call it, from Fede Alvarez. You have Evil Dead Rise that very much have horror significantly higher in the mix than comedy. You still have some slapstick or what I would call splat stick elements going on in all three of those films, but the unnerving nature and the disturbing nature and the gore effects and the intensity is much more the focus in those. Then you get to Army of Darkness, and it's the opposite, where there's still some horror aspects, there's still some tension in there, but the comedy is drastically higher in the mix on that film. And so that is distinctly much more of a comedy than it is a horror flick. Evil Dead 2 is the one movie in this franchise, in my mind, that really tries to maintain an even mix of both throughout the entire film. And for many, that's probably the reason why it's the best one. It's the one that has the most even mix and the most even representation of what you want from an Evil Dead film. But I'm the oddball to where I feel like trying to do both kind of makes the horror and the comedy less effective for my own personal taste. And I've watched Evil Dead 2 like a dozen times. Like, this is a movie that I actively try to get rid of this hot take. I actively look at it and go, look, maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I've been in a bad mood the last 7 times I've watched this. Maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset. And I always walk into my rewatch going, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the one where I'm going to watch it and suddenly the light bulb's going to go off. It's going to click and I'm going to see the classic, the best of the franchise that everybody else sees. And it just never happens. I don't really enjoy the recap remake first act of the Evil Dead, because Evil Dead 2 is a different studio, I believe, so they kind of had to recap the events of the first film by remaking it to a degree. So especially when I watch it like in a binge watch, I feel like the first act is like redundant because I just experienced this. And then you get the whole second act, which is just full on goofy slapstick and Bruce Campbell, doing a lot of crazy stunts and like the deer head on the wall going crazy and him bouncing up and down. And then the third act, you get a lot of the gore fest and the chainsaw arm and everything. Like, it's still fun. Like I said, I still like the movie, but it's just the experience in the Evil Dead franchise that I value the least. The first film genuinely is creepy as fuck and it's cool. And I like how raw and low budget and like almost guerrilla style that it's made. I really enjoy the low quality, intentional and non-intentional elements of that film. The Fede Alvarez film is my favorite of this franchise. That movie is just metal as fuck. Army of Darkness, I have so much nostalgia for because I watched it as a kid constantly and I love the comedy. It's genuinely a laugh out loud funny movie to me, and there's not many of those that consistently make me laugh every time I rewatch it. And Evil Dead Rise, while I felt like I wasn't as high on it as I thought I should have been when I first watched it, I rewatched it here a couple of months ago, and that is just a genuinely great Evil Dead film that is along the same lines of the Fede Alvarez one, which is just a gore fest and is just intense as fuck. I value all those experiences, and I rewatch those more than I watch Evil Dead 2. So this is one that, again, I understand that I'm in the minority, and I understand why I'm in the minority, but as many times as I have tried to not be the minority, Evil Dead 2 is my least favorite of the franchise. But now we have number 1. Not only the movie take that I was probably most nervous to say publicly, but also the one that I have gotten the most continuous shit for, the one that people consistently use as like evidence that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about if they don't agree with something else that I have said since then. It is the one that gets brought up the most and the one that gets the most baffling responses and the most bewildered responses by a landslide. And that is the fact that I genuinely think that Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is one of the better Halloween films. I know you've clicked off the video. Come back, listen to my explanation, come back. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is a movie that I understand fully why people don't like it. Like, it is one of those absolute love or hate films. There's no middle. I've never met anybody that's in the middle on it. It's either I love what it does or I detest this movie's existence. And I get it. It takes a lot of bold swings. It is the most unique Halloween film aside from Season of the Witch. It does the most Rob Zombie shit you could possibly imagine with the Halloween property. And I'll even take it a step further. I think it's Rob Zombie's best film.
Shut the fuck, shut. Did I say no? Oh, shit. Say it again. Say something else.
But genuinely, the first Halloween movie from Rob Zombie, I'm not a big fan of. I don't like the first act at all. I think it's unwatchable. I think the dialogue is horrendous. And I don't care about seeing Rob Zombie as, the poor little white trash kid that didn't get to go trick-or-treating. That's not interesting to me at all. The second act of the film, to me, is a wasted potential where you could have had a lot of time in the asylum and build out the relationship between him and Loomis, and they kind of fast forward through that. The only part of the movie that I somewhat enjoy is the ramped up, Rob Zombified John Carpenter's Halloween third act. And again, it's not even a third act that I love, but that's the side of the movie that I enjoy the most. You get to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and this is distinctly a Rob Zombie Halloween film. This is him taking everything in his own direction with seemingly no rules or shackles. Just do whatever the hell you want. And while that definitely pissed off a lot of people and people really do not like what he did, I'm one of those people that I prefer seeing Rob Zombie unshackled and him doing distinctly his own unique thing that has never been done in this franchise than seeing him just kind of throw the Rob Zombie paint over the original film and try to do little things here and there to Rob Zombify it. I think that Rob Zombie's Michael Myers is intense as fuck in this. I like the fact that he only wears the mask whenever he is in kill mode. I think it gives a purpose to the mask and it kind of makes the mask a character in the movie, and it's very unique. I like the fact that he's kind of wandering the earth until the Halloween holiday wills him back to Haddonfield. I think that's interesting. This is still the only movie in this entire franchise where you actually get to see Laurie Strode react to the revelation that she is the sister of Michael Myers. We never got that with the Jamie Lee Curtis character. In the second film, you have Loomis find out, but he never tells Laurie. And then in H2O, she just knows. And then, later on, you get the 2018 ones, which say that they're not siblings, even though they might as well have been because it's the same movies. So I like the fact that we get to see Laurie get that revelation. And the way that they did it with Loomis's book, I thought was really interesting. Loomis, again, I understand why people don't like him. And I definitely think he's grating because he's such an asshole in this. But it's at least something different that I appreciate versus just Loomis turning into almost a crazy person by the end of Halloween 5 and 6. So there's aspects to even what McDowell is doing that I think is interesting, and him trying to redeem himself by the end of it. I think that the kills are gory as fucking intense. This is still the goriest and most brutal film in the entire franchise, which I appreciate. I think that the scene between Brad Dourif and Danielle Harris, and Brad Dourif's performance specifically, is maybe the best acting in this entire franchise. And many would say is a performance the movie doesn't deserve, and fair enough. But I think Brad Dourif is so heartbreaking in this movie, in that scene specifically, and him just unhinged by the third act, wanting to straight up murder Dr. Loomis in front of all the other sheriffs and everything because of what his book has done. It's an experience that I think is so unique and distinctly different that I crave something like that when I'm watching through this franchise, because so much of Halloween, and a lot of them I do like, so much of the Halloween franchise is wash, rinse, repeat. Same stuff, same storyline, same plot beats, just new kills and a new mask for better and a lot for worse. So yeah, I get it. Whenever you have something that's distinctly different and unique and takes chances, inevitably you're going to turn a lot of people off that kind of want the same, and they kind of want things to be within a certain box of parameters. I'm not that person. Not that person at all. So I genuinely appreciate what he did. There's still a lot of flaws with the movie. Don't get me wrong. It is not perfect. It's not even anywhere close to perfect. There are things that I do dislike about Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. That white horse shit can go fuck itself. And the director's cut having Michael speak at the end, that can also go fuck itself. But the vast majority of the big swings that Rob takes with this film, I genuinely enjoy, appreciate, and value to where it's one of my favorites of this franchise. And as much as people hate when I say that, I'm sticking to it, and you'll hear me say it again. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a playlist up here of our MegaCon panels, one of which is that Hot Take Smackdown, so please check that out if you enjoyed this. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be, even when it's a hot take.